defeating aggressor and achieving peace in Ukraine is a top priority for the country's leadership during the wartime. On a daily basis, President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelenskyy delivers his updates on his efforts on a political action, weekly highlights of this effort in our today's broadcast. This is UA English Broadcast, Nick Starkov in studio. Future of Ukraine. And now I want to present to our audience our material that is dedicated directly to this topic.
Less than 10 people at a small table. Representatives of the Ukrainian media gathered at the office of the head of the president. Volodymyr Zelenskyy starts with the main topic, the fate of the defenders of Mariupol. What they did, they are already heroes. If they decide to take this or that step, no one will forbid them. The camera focuses on the president. Zelenskyy is dressed in a t-shirt of an American military brand. The attention is drawn to the badge on his chest, which is a combination of the Ukrainian flag and the company emblem. According to the company's website, a t-shirt can be bought for just $25, and the revenue will be spent for humanitarian relief efforts in Europe. Even such a small detail reminds the world of the goal to stop the war. The situation is certainly not getting better. Our military are blocked and the wounded are blocked along with them. There are many killed, unfortunately. There is a humanitarian crisis. There is not enough food, medicine. Nevertheless, the guys defend heroically. We are grateful to them for that. The gratitude alone is definitely not enough, so different plans and negotiation processes are being worked out.
Future of Ukraine and future of Mariupol. These topics runs through all the addresses of the week since on 24th of March, Zelenskyy appealed to the Swedish Parliament. In his proposal, he stated that Sweden can take part in the reconstruction of Ukraine, of one of the cities. And just on the previous day, yesterday, the conversation got its development. The minister and the president were talking about the renovation of Mariupol.
To Swedish Prime Minister, I described the critical situation in Mariupol. We discussed defense support for Ukraine and toughening of anti-Russian sanctions. I thanked for supporting Ukraine's membership in the EU.
Also, the topic of renovation was brought up with in a discussion with Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of Great Britain. The British government also is ready to take part in renovation of the capital and its region. So we see how broadly how the anti-war coalition begins and it becomes broader and wider, and we are now going to discuss the topic of the anti-war coalition, our friends, Western partners, with our first guest. This is Ilya Kusa. He's an international relations analyst for the Ukrainian Institute for the Future. My greetings to you, Mr. Ilya.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming to our studio today. So the expression that is always up during the addresses, the anti-war coalition, is not just something heard once or twice. Which countries can be on this coalition list? We never hear this. And which countries can be added soon, and who will never be in this list?
Well, I think it's more correct to talk not about coalition, in a full-term sense of this word, because legally there is no coalition, because all countries together with Ukraine, they don't have military obligations or some other legal obligations or treaties signed with Ukraine on military and alliance, So I think it's more correct to talk about political considerations which make different countries formulate their position towards Russian invasion of Ukraine. And why is it it is more correct because this will give you the opportunity to understand why actually some countries can be named as Ukraine's partners in this war and others not. For example, so I think there are three categories of countries in the world today. First one is these are predominantly those countries who we sometimes refer to as the collective West or Western countries. These are EU and NATO members plus the United States and their allies in Asia and Europe, who actually are the biggest partners of Ukraine today because they ship armaments, they give financial support, political, diplomatic aid, and many others things that we are now in need. The second category of countries is those who are with Russia, although it's just several countries which are hugely dependent on Russia, such as Syria, for example, or North Korea. So these are mainly countries who are either dependent or, like in North Korean case, are very anti-Western in their foreign policy. That's why they are ideologically very close to what is Russia doing. And the third category of countries is the biggest one, are those who actually decided to take a neutral, as they see it, a neutral stance in this story. So here you can name all non-Western, but nonetheless huge countries like China, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, you name them. So this is how the world today is divided on the question of supporting Ukraine. So it's not about, like who is in the coalition or against the coalition. It's more about, it's more broadly about political affiliations and different levels of ties with Russia that these countries have.
We know that there are couple countries in Europe that still that not are getting the neutral position right now towards the war and aggression, but there are some hints that were made, especially during this week. One of these hints was the supposed visit of the President of Federal Republic of Germany, Frank-Walter Steinmeier, and the probable rejection of this visit to Ukraine. We also heard a comment of the Scholz on this, and he was particularly upset due to this situation. What would you say about the position of namely couple countries, Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands?
Well, I would say that they don't support Russia at all. This is like 100%, and we can't say that they are in any way supporting Russia or any of their rhetoric. But of course, these countries, if we analyze positions of different EU member states, they represent the so-called moderate camp, which effectively call for not imposing the most radical package of sanctions that is now being used and being pushed by such countries as Poland or Baltic states, namely imposing a total energy embargo. Because first of all, these countries are very dependent on imports of Russian energy resources, so they can't, for today, they objectively can't find any alternative any alternative partners to replace Russian gas swiftly. For this, they need from 2 to 4 years. And secondly, these are countries that want this war to end as soon as possible because they are really concerned about about the economic toll this war has on their economy. Namely Germany, where they already witnessed hikes in energy and prices of basic products. That's why I think we have this kind of response, which is, for them, it is a moderate position towards sanction policy. For many Ukrainians, of course, it could seem that they don't want to go radical on Russia. This is true, but I don't see here any signs of supporting Russia. So I don't think that this moderate position is equal to supporting Russia. That's why, for example, I personally don't think that the decision, well, alleged decision to reject German president's visit to Ukraine is a strategic one. I think it was a mistake rather than some kind of an effective decision taken. But okay, I mean, I understand this from the emotional point of view, but from rational point of view, Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, Italy, and maybe France, these countries don't want this war to drag on. They want it to finish as soon as possible with some kind of a ceasefire deal so that they could stabilize markets, stabilize prices, and move on with their policies, including the policy of decreasing Russian gas imports into Europe, but to make it more stable, more predictable, and to realize it in a more due way over the next years.
So thank you very much for your opinion and your stand on this topic, and we will continue to discuss it with our next guest. And I also want to say thank you very much. This was Ilya Kusa. He was a senior international relations analyst in the Ukrainian Institute for the Future. Almost every day, there are some topics that we can be aware that are in the center of the rhetoric of President and Bankova. In the Friday's address particularly, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy answered the question, when will the world come to the end?
Я завжди кажу всім нашим партнерам.
I always tell all of our partners with whom I discuss this issue that the amount of support for Ukraine directly determines the progress of peace. It literally depends on how many more Ukrainians will be killed by occupants. If someone says a year or years, I answer, you have the power to make the war much shorter.
And now we continue discussing the question with the analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies, the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, Andreas Umland. My greetings to you, Mr. Umland.
Vitalia, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming to our studio. We've just discussed with our expert here in studio the question of how many friends and how many neutral countries there are really in the world, and your colleague probably stated the question. His stand towards this question was quite interesting. He stated that there are more neutral countries in the world towards this situation, or those who are trying to stay on this position. Do you agree with this position?
Yes, of course, there are some countries in the world that have not taken a decision or that do not want to take a position because they have some links with Russia or that they have their own geopolitical considerations. The biggest country that comes to mind and has taken this sort of ambivalent position is India, that has behaved in a, I would say, disconcerting way over the last 1.5 months. China is perhaps rather an ally of Russia in all of that, but also not as quite as close ally as Russia wishes. Even in China, there are apparently considerations that what Russia is currently doing in Ukraine goes too far, and there are countries like in the European Union, like Hungary, Italy, Cyprus, partly Greece, and others that have sort of taken ambivalent positions on what is happening in Ukraine. Perhaps not so much officially, but the discourse there is rather ambivalent. And of course, in Europe, also Serbia has to be named here as a country that behaves more like an ally of Russia than a friend of Ukraine.
Also, one of the questions was also is about the rejection of the visit of the President of Federal Republic of Germany, alleged rejection. So we know that it was supposedly planned that Frank-Walter Steinmeier would visit Ukraine. So after some days, the information showed up alleging that this visit was not considered by Ukrainian leader. So is it some hint? What's your stand on this? Is it some message, and what does it? What can be? How this message can be assessed by the West?
Yes, this rejection of Steinmeier's visit to Kiev is hotly discussed in Germany, and one has to say that it's a controversial discussion. Most of the commentators think that this was an overreaction by the Ukrainian president to disinvite Steinmeier from this visit. But on the other hand, many of the commentators that I have read also show a certain understanding for this decision. And now we even learn that the preparation of this visit was apparently not very well coordinated. That seems to have been an idea of the Polish president that Steinmeier would join this delegation of the Polish president and the representatives of the three Baltic republics. And this idea was apparently not regarded as appropriate in Kiev. So maybe there's even an overinterpretation of this particular result, because this coordination of the entire invitation, if there ever was indeed an invitation, was apparently unclear. I think one should not overinterpret all of this. On the whole, Germany has supported Ukraine before the Euromaidan, after the Euromaidan, after the annexation of Crimea and start of the pseudo-civil war in eastern Ukraine, and also after what has recently happened. What is lacking in Germany is a proper understanding of East European geopolitics, which has to do a lot of misunderstanding of world politics in general, which is very much conditioned by the sort of unique security position that Germany is in, being a member of the EU, NATO, and being surrounded by friends. Therefore, the German understanding of both Russian foreign policies and the problems that countries like Ukraine, not only Ukraine, but Georgia and Moldova have, is complete.
We remember how the interview by the ambassador of Ukraine, Andriy Melnik, to Germany, that said that one of the ministers from Germany, before, just on the eve of the invasion, stated that he does not believe Ukraine would stand this aggression, and probably it will be defeated over a couple of days, just 72 hours if I'm not mistaken. How do you think this situation, I mean, this assessment of the politics and the reality here in Ukraine is changing? I mean, the mind of the politicians, German, does they have some change in it? And another question is, comment please on how Zelenskyy reacts on the world's commentaries, especially we're talking about ones from the United States, stating about the possible end of the war in the end of year. If you remember these comments by Jake Sullivan, the alleged comments, and General Milley, they stated that probably the war would end till the end of the year.
Well, first about this conversation between the Ukrainian ambassador, Andriy Melnik, and the Minister of Finance, Christian Lindner, who is also the leader of the Free Democratic Party of Germany, one of the three coalition partners, the current governmental coalition. I think this statement by Lindner, if it is true, indeed illustrates very well the misunderstanding of East European geopolitics that I just mentioned. Russia is overestimated, Ukraine is underestimated. The entire sort of conflict is seen in a rather strange sort of post-imperial, post-colonial vein, where the old empire still calls the shots, and somehow we will have to sort of consider that. And the last weeks have illustrated that this is not a good approach.
And the question was also, we've just heard one of the sound bites by President Zelensky from his Friday's address. He stated, "This is the Western."
I'm hearing here voices from your collaborators.
Excuse me. We sometimes have some technical issues. I'm just asking to my team if it's possible to make some adjustments. And how do you hear me now, Mr.
I hear you well now.
Do you hear me well? Okay. The question was, let's back to the question, and we've just heard the statement by the Zelensky, Volodymyr, the president of Ukraine. He said that answering back, he was persuasive, extremely in extreme form. He was persuading somehow, but to whom this was addressed? I mean, directly the words that the amount of support for Ukraine directly determines the progress of peace. It literally depends on how many more Ukrainians will be killed by occupants. If someone says a year or years, I answer, you have the power to make the war much shorter.
Yes, this is a valid statement, and I think it's not well understood in the West, because there are many who think that perhaps a defeat of Ukraine would sort of end the war, and that should be a desirable result. The problem here is, of course, that we had already an example for this sort of approach. Ukraine has tried, in fact, already this approach in 2014, when the Ukrainian leadership decided not to give the order to the Ukrainian troops in southern Ukraine, including Crimea, to resist the annexation of Crimea, first the occupation and then the formal annexation of Crimea, although there were about 20,000 Ukrainian troops. Not all of them may have followed the order by Kiev to resist the annexation, but a few thousand probably would have followed this order. But Kiev decided not to do this, and as we saw, this decision neither solved the Crimea issue nor did it bring peace to Ukraine, and therefore a defeat of Ukraine will not bring the result that many imagine in the West. It will not bring peace. It will not solve anything. It will just continue on, as we saw already in 2014, after the annexation of Crimea was done. Then the pseudo-civil war in eastern Ukraine was started by Russia. So many seem to forget this, and therefore I think the West has Ukraine has also to refer back to these examples, or refer to the Moldovan example. Moldova has excluded in 1994 a NATO membership in its constitution. It has declared itself bloc-free. That should also be an example for this common belief that somehow an exclusion of Ukraine would then solve the problem. Since 1994, the Russian troops have remained in Moldova. The pseudo-state in Transnistria, supported by Moscow, continues to exist 30 years after it was created. So all of these sort of practical experiences from the past need to be mentioned, so that the West understands why the Ukrainians do not want to capitulate, why they need weapons, why they need, in fact, a victory.
So we thank you very much for being with us in our studio. This was Mr. Andreas Umland. He serves as analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. And now we are going to continue our discussion about the weekly statements of the Ukrainian leader with our next topic. We will never forget. We never forget about such small but things that, as a psychology, we always pay attention not only to what is said but also to how the statement was said. Remembering how Putin or Scholz or Biden, how these leaders deliver their statements, we also pay attention to how Zelenskyy does. And to talk about this thing, we today have in our studio a PhD, a professor in psychology, vice president of the Association of Political Psychologists of Ukraine, Svetlana Chunikhina. My greetings to you, Svetlana. Do you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. I will speak in Russian if you let me.
If you can hear me well, now we can continue talk in Russian. I just introduced you in English. So the President Zelenskyy's position, what does it say about? As a psychologist, can you see some hidden messages? Can you draw a parallel between him and other leaders?
President Zelensky's position is such that there is no need to look for hidden messages, because everything he wants to say he expresses very clearly in words and very firmly. In this sense, politics, in our traditional sense, when there are hidden senses or half-spoken words, hints, for Zelensky it is over, and a wartime confrontation has begun. Now it is not the time for hints, I would say.
So tell me, we saw during the meeting of the presidents of Belarus and Russia, when in particular your colleagues noted that Lukashenko's position expresses fear, while Putin's one in turn reflects lack of confidence. Is there something similar in Zelensky's view, or opposite, his expressions, for example, speak of a confidence?
No one probably has the luxury to talk about certainty in what's going on right now, but if you compare the three leaders you named, Zelensky's position certainly looks the strongest, the most unambiguous and without haunting meaning. You would probably ask me what had changed in Zelensky during those 53 days of war. I would say that right now, over the last few days, he shows signs of something that could be called emotional burnout, because Zelensky used to be very emotional in his speeches, in all ones he makes for the Ukrainian people and the ones he addresses to the international audiences. Now he feels tired and somewhat emotionally exhausted, and that impoverishes the emotional palette of what he's talking about. He's amazingly consistent though. His position is absolutely clear, consistent, and it makes his position much stronger than, for example, Biden's one, who is forced to maneuver between the various fears of his audience, his electorate, and certainly much more with the leaders you mentioned, the leaders of our closest neighbors, Putin and Lukashenko, who really aren't in a strong position right now, although they are the aggressors.
Thank you very much. I think you said the maximum of what you could, given the information we have. It was in the comparison of these three leaders you confirmed the idea that now Zelensky looks more confident than Putin. So thank you very much for your opinion. До следующих эфиров. And I just want to say thank you to our commentator, Svetlana Chunikhina, PhD, and Vice President at the Psychology in Association of Political Psychologists of Ukraine. This was our talk about the weekly statements of Zelensky. We tried to deliver you some concrete topics that were brought up during this week, and we'll continue delivering you the most concentrated information about this in a week. Thank you for being with us. This was Nick Starkov in studio, and see you